Ideas are an individual endeavor, but innovation is a team sport. And creating a high-performance innovation team can transform industries, economies, and people's lives. I'll be right back.
This is the Killer Innovations Podcast with Phil McKinney. Keep in mind that the information and opinions expressed in this podcast are Phil's, and Phil's alone, and they don't necessarily reflect those of his past, current, or future employers. Now, here's Phil McKinney.
We've all seen teams that have come together to produce some great results. We've all seen our favorite sports team win the World Series, the Super Bowl, the Stanley Cup, World Soccer. We've seen businesses that we've admired that have just had just that right team chemistry to create that really next breakthrough product. And we've just seen products and brands that we've just fallen in love with and just wonder, what was the team that really brought that together? In some rare cases, we've been part of these teams. Unfortunately, in my career, I've actually been a part of a couple of these teams. It is by chance that these teams have the right stuff. Is it? I don't think so. I think there's a way that you can actually dissect those teams and truly understand how you can build these high-performance innovation teams for your business. In most cases, many of these teams have come together purely by accident. It's a small group of individuals who've come up with a great idea, who've got that passion. And in my experience, give me passion, and I'll go out and I can move mountains with passion to go solve and build really breakthrough products or services. But in some cases, if you've taken the time to really dissect these teams and truly understand them, you truly can come up with those really killer breakthrough products. So, what does it really take to go create a high-performance innovation team? First of all, create a bold, outrageous goal, what I call a BOG. This is critical. This is the challenge that ignites the passion of the people. It needs to have visible impact on your business, on industry, on the world. It needs to be something that's high profile. It needs to be something that really is going to change the world. And it may not be something that's high profile in the form of being on the front page of newspapers, but it needs to be something that the team members afterwards can look back upon and say, I was part of that. It's going to have a lasting impact on the business. And the key here is that if you're going to have multiple high-performance teams and you want to maintain them operating at a very high level, you, as a leader in that business or somebody who is going to go try to go solve a particular problem, you can't have just one bold, outrageous goal. You need to keep them coming. You need to keep them coming in such a way that the team always has that next mountain to climb. Secondly, you need an enemy. You need something that clearly allows the team to vent their target to. It needs to be that clear, unambiguous target on who it is. Whether that's somebody that is a direct competitor today, somebody who is a leader and you're trying to surpass them, whatever it is, you need to define clearly what that enemy is. And that enemy allows you then to create a sense of urgency. Sense of urgency if that company or individual is ahead of you, you need to surpass them, which means you need to work faster than they're working. You need to be smarter, more clever, more innovative than they are. If it's somebody who's trying to catch up with you, then you need to make sure that everybody understands the urgency and the risk of having that person or company catch up to you. And you need to use this enemy to keep the focus externally aimed. It's very easy when you've got these high-performance teams for others within the organization to target them. And you get the situation where all of a sudden the focus is on fighting internal issues, internal negative inertia, whatever it is. So by having a clearly defined enemy, you're allowing the high-performance team to focus that energy externally and not get wound up on any of the internal issues. Third, freedom. You need to let go. You need to allow this team to have freedom from the corporate hairball. Now, what do I mean by the corporate hairball? In many companies, it doesn't matter whether you're a small company, a medium-sized company, a large company, a non-for-profit association, whatever it is, you know what I mean by the corporate hairball. It's all those little processes and procedures and sign-offs and approvals and politics that get in the way. And what the corporate hairball is basically the situation where something has happened in the past. There's been a procedure that has been put in place in order to make sure that that does not happen again, and that is the hair that gets added to the hairball. Now what you find, though, is hairs get added to the hairball, they never get removed. And so companies that have been around for a long time, companies that have been around for only a matter of 3, 4, 5 years have hairballs. Companies that have been around for hundreds of years have very large hairballs. And the challenge when you're trying to create a high-performance team is that hairball basically is like getting your hand stuck in double-sided tape. No matter how hard you try and you grab it with the other hand and all of that, you're still stuck to it and you can't get away from it. High-performance teams that get wound up and having to deal with the corporate hairball will find themselves being really slowed down significantly, and the opportunity for risk is greatly reduced. So freedom, let go, give the team freedom from the corporate hairball, which means if you're the manager, it's your job to fight the corporate hairball such that that team does not get distracted. Fourth, the right level of resources. Now, in a previous podcast, I talked about the benefit of constraining resources and what it has, and this is just basically reinforcing that message. You do not want to give the team too much resources. Too much resources kind of forces them to think along the standard lines that is happening inside the industry. You want to use resource constraint to create new perspectives. By not having the latest tools, by not having all of the budgets, by not having all of the people that they would want, you force them to have to come up with an alternative way. And by forcing them to change their perspective, you actually will help them to uncover potentially a much better solution to the problem than anybody else is going to think of. So even if you have significant funds and significant tools and significant resources, by giving all those resources and giving those all to the teams, you run the risk of forcing them down the standard path that everybody else is down. Use the constraint. Now, the challenge here is that if you give them too little, you may be asking for the impossible. And if you give them too much, it's actually less of a challenge. And so this is probably the one area where you need to be able to keep your pulse on the dials to know when you're putting too much constraint on or when you're giving up too many resources to the team and they're kind of falling into the trap of doing it the same old way. Fifth, the right team mix. This is critical. Now, I've sat down here and I've kind of worked through and I thought back through all the teams that I was involved in, whether as a team member or as a leader of a team, and I kind of broke down kind of categories of the people that I felt were kind of the real nucleus of the success of some of these teams. First off, you need one strong visionary. This is the person that is the soul of the product, the soul of the service, who has it all in their head, and who is going to keep everybody else honest. When you try to encroach or change or diminish what is the soul around this product, this is the person that is going to stand up and confront and is not going to let people or let anybody, the team, internal or external, mess with the soul of the product. Next is you need one Radar O'Reilly. Now, I just used this term this last week where I referred to somebody on my team as my Radar O'Reilly. And this was somebody who was in the, I would call the younger age category, who did not grow up watching MASH. If you have not watched MASH, rent the movie and you'll understand what I mean. But Radar O'Reilly was the name of a character who amazingly could get anything done. It didn't matter what it was. This was the go-to person. You gave them the task and they went out and got it done. And And it didn't matter whether it was in their area or whoever area. They knew how all the backdoor methods to beat the system, to get around the red tape, to get whatever you needed to be successful. Every major army unit, military unit in the world has one of these individuals, the scroungers, whatever. Every team needs this Radar O'Reilly. Next is you need one or two mavericks. These are the crazy scientist types, at least in my case for high-tech products. These are guys or women who can do the impossible. And I'm amazed by these people every time we're working on one of these high-performance programs. And what I find is they do the impossible, and they typically do it overnight. These are the people that you give the really, really hard problems, or that you really need some breakthrough solution. And amazingly enough, overnight, they've come back with multiple alternatives, and they've solved the problem. Next, you need what I would call one parent. This is what I would call this is the person that I would say provides what I call the adult supervision. High performance teams can be very high energy, very focused, can be almost self-feeding in some cases if you're not careful. This is the person who knows when to yell break, knows when to go off and have some kind of other activity, whether that be a beer bash on a Friday or Saturday out with the family, the spouse and children at a park. Knows when to celebrate the birthdays and does all the little special touches. Every high-performance team needs one of what I would call parents, from the standpoint of providing the adult supervision. Next is you need a handful of execution demons. These are the people who just deliver. They just execute. Not ones where they're not high maintenance. You don't need to constantly be checking them. You don't need to be looking over the shoulders. You don't need to be doing any of that. These are just people that you can just simply give them the work and they just do it. Hand in and hand out. Now, next is what I would call the bridge or the translator. Now, this is a critical person depending on what the outcome of the program is. If the outcome of this program is then to take whatever the end result is and roll it back into a main core of your business, you need this bridge translator. This is kind of the external interface. This is the person that is communicating out what you're doing and then communicating in what is going on in the rest of the part of the business from the standpoint of anything that would impact the program that you're working on. This is particularly done when you have big organizations and you need to get that organization to align. Now, some of the challenges with this right team mix, though, is that they're very difficult to manage. A lot of different types of personalities, people who just want to execute. Tell me what I need to do, and I'll go execute. You got the visionaries, which are kind of the constantly in brainstorming mode. You got the Radar O'Reillys who are trying to solve specific problems. So you've got to be a very strong manager in order to manage this right team. You also need to protect this team from the standpoint of the external teams will attack. It's what I call the corporate antibodies. As soon as you've got a high-performance team that's working on a high-profile project, you're going to have other parts of the organization send out the antibodies. They're going to be whispering in people's ears, oh, they're off doing crazy stuff, or that what the approach they're taking is never going to work. We've tried that before. It's never helped. Whatever it is, it's your job to protect your team, such that all they feel is that that management is 100% behind them, and that they're going to deliver and that they're going to be successful. So again, your job is to protect, feed, nurture, and challenge. And what I mean by challenge for the right team mix is you got to set the bar extremely high and never, ever settle. Don't back off. Think long and hard up front what your bold, outrageous goal is. But once you've defined it, don't settle. And by defining that settle, this right team mix will gel because they've got a common goal, which is to solve that objective. If you're able to do all 5 of these, if you're able to define really that bold, outrageous goal, if you are clearly can communicate and identify that enemy, if you can't give the freedom, meaning allow this team to operate outside the normal processes and let them execute quickly, if you give them the right level of resources, not too much, not too little, but the right level, and you get the right team mix, the results can be absolutely mind-blowing. In my case right now today, I'm just starting on a process of merging 2 high-performance innovation teams as a result of an acquisition I'm involved in. Now I'm going to link to some background in the show notes, so if you're interested in what's going on, I'll link to in the show notes so that you can actually click in the show notes and see what I'm talking about, so you have a little bit of a perspective here. And what I'm finding in this case is that you've got different cultures. You've got a very, very small high-performance team merging in with a very big organization with multiple high-performance teams, and how do you make that happen? And the key here is making sure that you've got common vision, a common enemy, and a common, bold, outrageous goal. And in my case, I am really pumped to make this work. I can see the outcome, I can see the benefits, I can see how it's going to impact businesses and industries. And that's what gets me excited about managing and putting together the right people so that they can feel that same exhilaration that I felt earlier in my career of being part of a high-performance innovation team. This week's killer question really is tied into this whole concept of finding or defining these bold, outrageous goals, or these BOGs. So this week's killer question is really around how do you find what some of the areas of constraint are so that you can set a very outrageous goal for your high-performance team to go solve. So this week's killer question is, what are the current constraints for your product or service? Once again, what are the current constraints for your product or service? Now, honestly, do you think you really know all of the constraints? Now, when I ask this question of executives and engineers and sales organizations and customers, you ask them about what the constraints are, and they give you the first two or three. Now, I'm going to challenge you to think beyond just the 2 or 3. So, think about what are the current constraints for your product or service in the following areas. Customer. Are you focused on a specific customer segment or segments? That's a constraint. Why not go for all customer segments? Are you just focusing on the young? Why not the old, the rich, the poor, the married, the singles, the college students? Whatever it is, think about what are the current constraints for your product or service based on customer. Next, what are the current constraints for your product or service around geography? Is your product or service only in the U.S.? Why not the rest of the part of the world? Why not in emerging countries? Why not in developing countries? Are you suffering under any constraints around geography? Next, what are the current constraints for your product or service around distribution? Is your product sold through a direct sales force? Or is your service sold by telemarketing? Or is it sold through retail? Is it sold online? Why? Why is that a constraint? Why don't you think about doing it other ways? Again, next one, what are the current constraints for your product or service around technology? What are the fundamental sciences and the fundamental technologies that are a constraint or limits to your product? Twice as fast, half the cost, half the energy, twice the energy, half the battery life, twice the battery life? What's the constraints around technology? And last, what are the current constraints for your product or service about price and margin? Are you suffering under a perceived constraint about what a customer's willingness to pay is and what kind of margin you can achieve? There are always a lot of assumptions by certain product categories. You buy a certain type of a product, the industry normally only gets X margin. That is an artificial constraint. So again, rather than just trying to think about current constraints and coming up with the top 2 or 3, think about what are your current constraints for your product or service around customer, geography, distribution, technology, price, margin. And you can probably actually come up with some more, but these are the ones that I just came up quickly, and these are the ones that typically are the ones that I find when I'm talking with people that are the ones that tend to unlock the really outrageous opportunities. So based on your thinking through that, how would you craft a bold, outrageous goal, a BOG? So sit down, think through it. What would be the bold, outrageous goal to remove one of these constraints for a high-performance team to go tackle? Now, is it challenging enough to push them beyond the obvious? Or are you settling for the next step innovation? And I'll just leave you this one thought. Be bold. This week's closing thought is on leadership. Now, leadership is tough, and leading a high-performance team can be downright scary. You feel like everything is just on the edge of chaos, and you're walking this very fine line. You're doing this balancing act where you pull it back, everything seems normal, but you're not pushing the team far enough. Other times, things are leaning way over the edge, and one wind blowing the wrong direction, and the wheels fall off the cart, and you've crashed. Now, the best advice I've ever heard was from Theodore Roosevelt. And Theodore Roosevelt said, "The best leader is the one who has sense enough to pick good men to do what he wants done, and self-restraint enough to keep from meddling with them while they do it." Now, for me, it's that meddling part that I find so tempting. Well, thanks for listening. I know it's been a couple of weeks since the last podcast, and I'm going to continue to do the podcast, and I'm going to try to do them more frequently, so just stay tuned. Keep the feedback coming. Send me an email at podcast@killerinnovations.com. I'm looking for just emails of encouragement, feedback on the particular shows, questions about the content, or suggestions for upcoming shows. So please send me an email, podcast@killerinnovations.com. Also, feel free to post your feedback on the show notes. And for more information on creativity and innovation, I invite you to visit the killerinnovations.com website. I'm in the process of launching a personal blog at philmckinney.com. And at this blog, I'm planning on just keeping a regular dialogue with you and others on creativity and on innovation, but also to give you kind of a behind-the-scenes look of what I do and my observations, maybe some rants, share with you some of the things that are going on, more of a day-to-day. I get a lot of questions about my day-to-day job and how I apply innovation and creativity on a more direct basis into the tasks that I'm working on. Now, again, I'm not going to be talking about my day-to-day job, but more about managing teams, driving innovation, those kinds of things. So stay tuned. I'm going to try to get the first post up there relatively soon, and then once I do that, I'll turn it on, and then you'll be able to get an RSS feed and just be part of that string of thoughts from me via the blog. And also, if you don't like the blog, you don't like the idea of the blog, let me know. I'm interested in your feedback. Next week, I will be in London, Paris, Munich, and Milan. That's on October 9th. I'll be on a press tour. So I'll be in London on Monday, in Milan on Thursday, and I'm doing the cities in order, one city per day, London, Paris, Munich, and Milan, for a press tour. If you're in the area, drop me a note by email, and maybe we can have a quick coffee in the morning before the press events in each of those cities. Again, thanks for listening. What I would ask this week is, why don't you drop me a note and tell me about how you are applying Killer Innovations to your career and business. We have a lot of new listeners. I'm interested in hearing from you. So how are you applying what you're hearing in the Killer Innovations podcast to your career and to your business? With that, thanks again for listening. We'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.